Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Michael Woods, founder of Inclusive Sport Design. Welcome to the ISD podcast, where we talk all things inclusion in sport with amazing guests who are out there making inclusion happen. So you can learn and be inspired to make inclusion happen in your club or sport organization too. We are recording on beautiful Gundungurra country, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Gundungurra people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also pay my respects and welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and all other Indigenous and First Nations peoples who might be watching or listening in today. Today, I am with Jason Webber to learn how he's kicking goals for inclusion in Welsh football. Jason is an expert and leader in inclusion and integrity in sport with over 10 years experience educating and advising a wide range of stakeholders. Currently, Jason is working in the Football Association of Wales as a quality, diversity, inclusion and integrity manager, and he's been integral in advancing the association's programs and impact. Jason's super passionate about sharing his knowledge and experience with others and is committed to making football and all sport more inclusive and equal for everyone. Jason Webber, welcome. I'm super excited to have you on the show.
Hi, Michael. No, thanks for having us. It's a real privilege.
Let's get straight into it, shall we? I'm super keen to kind of learn your origin story. How did you get involved in inclusive sport? How did that come about? What's that story for you?
Yeah, I suppose it's quite an interesting story, really. So I went to university doing sports science. So as many people from an early age wanted to be a professional player, didn't quite work out for me. I'm still holding out on that hope. But I ended up getting into coaching and coaching in a professional club in Wales at Cardiff City, and going to university to study sports science. Coming out of university, had an opportunity to join an organisation, a charity, which was an anti-racism charity called Show Racism, the Red Card, that uses football essentially as a tool to sort of change perceptions, sort of community engagement, and try and challenge racism in football, but also in society as well, and worked there for over 12 years. So very much was my first step really into the world of sort of equality, diversity, inclusion in society, but also in sport and specifically football as well. And kind of has led me over the years then into the current role that I'm in at the moment. And even through my coaching career, always had an interest in ensuring that everybody had the opportunity to play sports at any level, and trying to be the best version of themselves really was always a passion for me, which was then naturally led me into this industry.
Yeah, it's really interesting that I guess we've got a similar sort of, background in terms of how we ended up in our careers with I was studied sports coaching science initially and sports management, kind of, not accidentally, but sort of, found an opportunity and led me down the diversity, inclusion in sport sort of track. And so, which is another reason why, it's super, super exciting to have you on the show. So tell us a little bit about where, I guess, inclusion and diversity in sport is at in Wales more broadly, but in football in Wales as well. What's the lay of the land there?
Yeah, I think there's been huge improvements in recent times. I think the United Kingdom is generally a pretty progressive country. It's living across lots of issues. I think sport is quite a unique environment where, has traditionally been behind times for, equality, inclusion and diversity in comparison to other industries, particularly in the UK and across the world as well. And, coming into the organisation just over 2.5 years ago now, I think while, we did a lot of work around trying to raise awareness or as part of campaigns against discrimination, for example, and had sort of a lot of also provisions around participation for different community groups or people who are disabled, for example, to participate within football. But realistically, weren't doing enough certainly where we are now in trying to improve equality, diversity, inclusion within football as well. And I think lots of governing bodies of sport, are still in that sort of area within Wales and the UK as well. So, while might be a little bit ahead of other governing bodies across the world, but, realistically with resources and as I said, kind of being more of a progressive nation, should be doing more. And I think that lack of accountability really over the years has probably allowed that to be the reality of where we're at. So kind of coming in and, starting from quite a base level of what was or wasn't more so being done as within football and as an association as well, really.
And is there kind of a dimension or an aspect of the D&I space over there, which is kind of, more prioritized or more front of mind at the moment? Maybe, whether it's LGBTI plus communities, or maybe it's women's participation or disability. Certainly, look around the world, the kind of discourse and conversation around transgender participation is kind of really front of mind, particularly in certain sports like swimming, where FINA's just released their new policy in that regard. So is there anything like that front of mind or prioritized either for you guys at Welsh Football or just generally in Wales?
Yeah, I think what we've seen, particularly over the last decade, is that whatever gets the most attention or has the biggest voice at any given time has, historically had the most focus and attention, which I think is why the EDI space in sport also is, often quite fragmented, where you'll have a lot of momentum, supporting or making progress with a particular area, whether it be LGBTQ, trans athletes, anti-racism or ethnically diverse communities. And then the momentum kind of gets lost and the cycle kind of repeats itself. And we see it quite often in sport and in football, where you have a player that has been racially abused or had homophobic abuse, and there's an outcry and loads of media attention. And then it kind of, after a period of time, and the cycle just repeats itself. So I think that's something that where the shift that we've had is to try and focus on all areas and giving them equal amount of attention and continue to progress in each area. Because I think it's a danger of, if you say that, you should only focus on trans athletes or anti-racism or trying to increase equal opportunities for Black and Asian communities, then you have another community group that, sort of has their thoughts, well, what about me? What about my community group? So it's difficult, I think, to try and have that approach. I think everybody is just as important as every other community group and needs that attention and support as well. I think the one thing, of course, we have seen in the last couple of years, particularly since the death and murder of George Floyd, obviously in America, there has been, a real resurgence and probably the most sustained attention I think we've seen around that kind of Black Lives Matter message and the movement around that. Obviously, we've seen players taking the knee. Our international players have continued to do that as well. So, that is an area that, continues to receive real focus of attention. And of course, as you mentioned, the discourse around trans individuals accessing sport and some of the policy changes that we've seen is certainly something that is a huge focus at the moment, globally within sport as well.
So that's probably a really good segue into talking about how Welsh football is kind of trying to give attention equally, or at least fairly, to the various issues and domains of diversity and inclusion in sport over there. So I wanted sort of, if you could share with us the work you're doing with the new inclusion strategy and how that looks and what role that plays in helping you kind of tackle all of these complex issues.
Yeah, certainly. So one of my first roles and tasks coming in 2020 was to establish essentially the first strategy around our equality, diversity, inclusion work. So last year we launched the PAWB EDI strategy. Now PAWB means everyone in the Welsh language. So that's kind of our identity around our EDI work. And very much the vision of that then is that football then is a place for everyone everywhere within Wales. So that's kind of our overarching vision. But then kind of below that, the mission statement for me is the most important part, where we want to make sure that every single person has an equal opportunity. They're included in whatever role that might be, whether it be as a player, a coach, a club official, or volunteer. But then it's that kind of sense, that environment, then that feeling of belonging. So when they have those opportunities, they're included within that role or within football, and the environment then is really conducive for them to try and excel and be the best version of themselves. And actually their sexuality, their disability, their background, or whatever it might be, it doesn't actually matter. And they're kind of a core integral part of that football environment as well. But obviously notwithstanding that every single person does have specific needs and requirements. So it's very much around that equity idea, around acknowledging that people are different and have different needs, and ensuring that they provide whatever level of support they need to be able to be the best version of themselves and included. So that's very much the aims and just with mission and vision of our strategy, really.
Yeah, and I think the fact that the strategy has this kind of focus around working towards environments that create belonging and putting equity models at the center of that approach, I think is really good, and is probably a really progressive way of looking at diversity and inclusion strategy. Because a lot of, maybe in the past and still to a point at the moment, a lot of it is really about that kind of idea of, just inclusion as a set of actions of trying to make space in the existing structures of the sport, and essentially expecting people to kind of comply and sort of fit into models that maybe weren't designed for them in the first place. And that's what inclusion kind of means for a lot of sport organizations in particular over the years. Whereas now I think looking at things from the idea of belonging means that you kind of give yourself permission to do things differently, right? And listen to the needs and wants of the target audiences that you're really looking to engage with. So thinking about all of that, and the fact that it's quite a broad strategy as well, like you're kind of working with all people and it's got some pretty lofty goals in there. So how do you manage those priorities, and what do some of those actions look like to achieve those goals?
Yeah, definitely. So it's really important that we're successful with the strategy and continually monitor and adapt the strategy as well in the action plan. I think the EDI space in society is ever changing and ever shifting. So, being able to on the go modify and change. And as we sort of deliver and create new programs and initiatives, we get more learnings as well. And to try and gauge the success for it, actually, one of the pillars is around listening and understanding. So while we continue to become more diverse as an organization, where at the moment we don't have every group and community group represented in our association, it was important from the start to develop a range of networks then of those who historically have been underrepresented and still are underrepresented in football as well. So that as we were developing the strategy and also as we're developing programs, initiatives, changing rules, regulations, that actually then those people who are going to be impacted and affected by some of these changes, hopefully in a positive way, have a voice and have that opportunity then to be part of those discussions and part of that development. And I think that's, one of the key ways really that maybe we're doing things differently to lots of other governing bodies and organizations as well, is that while, gender-wise, we're pretty well represented in the association. But as you mentioned, historically, sport and football has been designed and set up by white men. And without understanding then the lived experiences and some of the specific requirements of different community groups. So making sure that we're involving everybody. So if we're looking to change a rule or regulation or develop a program or initiative, it's trying to get that knowledge and understanding and seeing the environment, the game through the lens and perspective of, a diverse group of people as we possibly can. And some of those networks, with the Asian Football Network, our Women's Network, our Disability Football Network, our Asylum Seeker and Refugee Network, for example, just to give a summary of some, has been really invaluable for us then to try and sort of, be more informed of our strategy and some of the specific actions in that. And then ongoing, the impact that it's having. Are people actually feeling that they belong, or do we still have, improvements need to be made in specific areas as well?
So how do you measure that then, that those, achievements of belonging and sense of belonging of participants? Are you using any measurement tools, or are you surveying people, or, how do you prove that you're making an impact there?
Yeah, and let's be honest, it's one of the real difficulties, because it's something that, you can't sort of often quantitatively sort of measure, what a lot of things that are data driven. So in terms of the numbers of, black coaches or black players or Asian players or female coaches, etc. We've got all the data across every characteristic that shows that. So we've got our baseline data, and we're seeing increases on lots of those areas. And I'm sure we'll share some programs that have led to that. But actually that feeling of and that evidence of how somebody feels them and their environment is a difficult one. So yeah, definitely through surveys that we've done and we will continue to do as well. But again, through the networks, who are, I suppose, a snapshot and a representation then of those different community groups, is that some of the, initiatives and programs that we've introduced over the last number of years and ongoing, is it improving that environment? And one of the networks we set up was the LGBTQ Football Network, that actually as part of that came then was the creation of the Rainbow Wall, which is our national team's LGBTQ fans group. And again, just a little story to hopefully show in practical ways of how something as simple as creating a group can try and change that feeling of belonging. Was working with the Rainbow Wall. We organised then for a group of them to have a group booking at our international stadium for one of the games going back about a year ago now, and spoke to an individual who actually hadn't been to the stadium in 10 years or gone to watch the game because they were fearful of maybe receiving sort of transphobic or homophobic abuse because of them sort of quite visually being part of the LGBTQ community, but actually working with the Rainbow Wall then through the LGBTQ network, having actually like-minded communities and allies sitting together just broke down that barrier, maybe that sort of either real or perceived fear of receiving that abuse for them to go to the game. And again, being part of that community at the game meant that they felt that they were safe and felt that they belonged, as part of the Red Wall, which is our branding for our wider fan base as well. So it's little stories like that hopefully will show that we're making progress really then in that feeling of, inclusiveness and belonging within the football family.
That's a really important, I guess, aspect of the work is spending the time to engage with the people that you're trying to engage with. And it sounds pretty straightforward and self-explanatory that you would do that. But I guess, listeners and people watching are probably sitting there going, oh yeah, I've heard, we know sometimes, programs or initiatives get rolled out without proper engagement and we don't always get the best results and we wonder why. But a lot of times it's just have the conversations with the people that matter. That's the start point for a lot of this stuff. So I want to pick up on those networks and partnerships and relationships that you've established around your programs and this strategy. And kind of, if you could talk us through kind of how you go about reaching out and making that connection and deciding, who's important to engage with and setting those relationships up, because I think that's probably one of the challenges that people working in the space or people attempting to engage with new audience is that initial outreach, that initial connection and building those genuine relationships. How do you go about doing that and what's some of your learnings there?
Yeah, so of course it's always a challenge. I think the first part is understanding the makeup of your club or organization first and foremost. Something that we did through audits, quality diversity audits, and understanding where you're underrepresented, where we're underrepresented on committees or our area associations or sort of run our grassroots football. And again, seeing where aren't people's voices being provided or having the opportunity to do so. And once you establish that, it's looking at, doing some community mapping, obviously in our case, on a country-wide basis, and finding out where are these communities based, where do they live? What groups are they part of? Other sports? Are they represented in other sports? And as you said, it's given that time and dedication to go out in person, ideally, into the community then to engage with some of those. And the Rainbow Wall, the LGBTQ group that we established, just started during COVID times. So we just sort of opened up an open invitation online via Zoom, and was just a conversation, completely unplanned, was unscripted, and just, opened up for the community to attend. And some people were involved in football, some people wasn't involved in football, but were interested in the conversation. And sometimes it's just providing that opportunity, that open arms and invitation for people to join and be able to do that. And then be, more importantly, and that's where the difficult part of it comes, is to be quiet and just listen. And I think that's really important. And, in some of the other groups that we've had, particularly when I first started, it was uncomfortable, I'll be honest, because there was a lot of areas and things that we weren't doing as well in and needed huge improvements. But actually trying to be authentic and sort of transparent and willing to listen and sort of hold your hands up and be, we're not doing enough in this area, and trying to take on that information and some of those barriers, challenges. But as I said, the most important part is to involve them in solutions so that you can take them on board, and then making sure then that you try and make some meaningful change as a basis to that. So yeah, that's what I'd say is kind of try and find where your communities are, whether it be religiously in terms of local faith groups, it could be demographics of, LGBTQ community. So things like pride events, obviously a great opportunity to go engage with that community as well. Just trying to find where they are and then taking time to reach out in an authentic way to speak to people.
In those engagements, whether it's around the strategy development or your program specifically, or even a specific program or audience that you've kind of worked with, is there anything that kind of came up or that you've learned that really surprised you or really challenged your kind of original or preconceived thinking or what you thought was true about people? Did anything like that happen that was a little surprising or out of the box for you?
I think, because I've been involved in the space for many years, I don't think there were too many things that I weren't expecting, but I think the main thing was, it was just validation on some of my thoughts on what I thought would be barriers or challenges to community groups. Just kind of validated that, I think. And as I said, part of our wider aim really of trying to change the perceptions of the sport, of us as an association as well, and trying to develop that trust with community groups. I think that were some of the real outcomes from it. And as I said, I think there was probably a couple of good ideas that came as part of solutions that maybe I hadn't thought of, that we've introduced as well. And one of the key aspects, for example, was working with sort of ethnically diverse communities, whereby actually it was knowledge of particular opportunities that was lacking really. So in terms of a good example, through our data, we realised that we only had 8 ethnically diverse sort of referees within Wales, out of hundreds of referees or match officials. So actually talking to some of the community groups, it was a lack of understanding of, there is a course that you could do this. It's online, and being able to access that and financially as well. I think, particularly for certain community groups, traditionally, are sort of living in deprived areas. So one thing that we introduced that had huge success was a referee diversity program. So we went into some communities in Cardiff and Swansea, which are highly the most diverse areas in Wales. And again, just had it open, even then invited the community along and just shared with them what is a referee, what are some of the benefits to it. The fact that you can receive the financial sort of money by refereeing games on a weekend, and some of the skills you can develop from it, but then providing bursary places then for a number of individuals to access that program for free. We ended up in just 2 sessions, sort of training up 30 referees, generally mixed half and half of men and women, some young boys and girls as well, that now are out refereeing and qualified as well, and part of a mentoring program. So, going from 8 to just 30, it was a huge percentage increase then on that of such a simple concept and program as well. And, we're extending that this year now, sort of more formally launching it from the pilot, but also now from that, and kind of linked to your question, we realized then that yes, the course and the cost of the course and access and that was a barrier, but actually then, even though they were qualified, couldn't afford then to go and buy a referee kit. So, now we've started to provide referee kit as part of that package as well, just to break down another barrier. So that was an example of something that we took the data and then had that conversations with the communities and created a program that has increased the inclusion, the opportunities as well then from that community in particular.
I think that's such a good example of why it's so important to have that engagement with the target audience, because, even if you get that feedback that, costs are an issue, right? And you go, cool, well, we'll make the accreditation cheap or free. That's only going to get people so far, right? The acknowledgement and the response to the layers of barrier or challenge or disadvantage that exists for some audiences requires more than just sort of a top line solution. There's multiple steps and multiple stages that you might need to work around. Of course, if they can't afford an accreditation, then the required kit is another cost that's going to be a barrier, right? Same as transport, getting to the games, they've got a referee could be a challenge, and how do you get around that? And there might be others. So you've got to have that engagement. So great outcomes from that program. We talked a lot about sort of what's going on at the Welsh Football level and things like that. And I'm sure hopefully we've got listeners and people watching who are kind of in clubland. So I'm keen to get your thoughts on, I guess, what do you think clubs can do, probably in support of your strategy, but more broadly, how do clubs tackle this stuff? And is there anything in the strategy or in the work that you're doing that is sort of targeted at helping clubs achieve diversity and inclusion outcomes as well?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a huge range of things that clubs can lead on themselves as well. And actually some of the greatest examples and case studies that I've come across, in recent times has been from the smallest grassroots clubs with the smallest resources. And, we've, as part of the strategy, obviously supporting our clubs to develop EDI within their local areas, but also within their clubs as well, is obviously a really important part of that. And for us, it's for them then to deliver on our local level. and bringing that strategy to life. So one of the things that we've developed is a called PAWB program. So which is essentially an EDI framework then for our clubs. So from our professional clubs right the way down to the smallest grassroots clubs as well. And it's very much a reflective framework, a toolkit, real practical advice and guidance for clubs then to develop EDI within their local area as well. And we could kind of touch on some of the areas already. That starting point really is around, first and foremost, trying to appoint an equality champion at their club. So somebody that's really going to be passionate and focused and have that responsibility of leading and developing EDI within their clubs and using the framework essentially as well. So we've sort of written that into our club licensing and our club accreditation. So we're just sort of starting now this season, and over the next couple of years, we'll filter down through the tiers right the way through. So every club in Wales will have to have an equality champion. And then basically we'll be testing with using the framework. So, it's not necessarily at the moment going to be something that will be assessed or we'll need to submit evidence or anything like that. But again, is a framework to work through. So the first point being knowing your club, knowing your community. So as we've already spoken about, doing an audit to finding out, well, actually, what groups are not currently in your club or represented in your club? What does your community look like? Where are the groups that you can sort of go and engage with as well? And then sort of having a real review around clubs, what policies do you have in place? Is everyone aware of those policies, guidelines? And then looking at access to facilities, to training pitches, to the club as well, understanding what are some of the barriers and challenges that maybe you don't have provisions in place to support. So we mentioned around sort of socioeconomic, the cost of joining a club, whether it be transport issues, and then sort of moving then into, developing equality, which hopefully will be addressing some of those gaps that they might have established in that review of developing policies, trying to put programs in place to have more opportunities for people. If clubs don't have provision for disabled children, for example, could you then set up a team that's specific for wheelchair users or other elements as well? And then looking into that kind of, creating that inclusive environment is sort of that third pillar of it then. So, making sure that how welcoming is the club, through the social media, through comms, how does the club represent itself? What type of imagery is used? Are you just using white boys, for example, in all your imagery? So thinking about how you can try and make the club attractive to diverse groups, to the LGBTQ community, what campaigns are you sharing and promoting? And then finally then is that increasing diversity, which for me always comes last, because if you don't get the environment right, if you become more diverse and the environment's not right, you're going to lose people straight away as well. So that's that community engagement then that we've already spoke about, going out into community groups and promoting your club or your organization or all these compliance organizations as well, of course, and part of those networks, establishing those and driving some of those things as well. So kind of throughout all the framework is practical templates, tools that clubs then can use to try and start that journey, as we always say, around sort of improving across equality, diversity, inclusion as well. And then kind of really is underpinned then, for club members around that education, which for me is always such an important part. So we established a PAWB education program last season. So throughout the season, often linked to various sort of global awareness days or periods like Pride Month, Australia Racism Red Cards Month of Action, which is in October at the moment, and having a workshop or a webinar then linked to that protected characteristic or sort of the element of EDI as well. So, we delivered over 30 sessions last year and we'll continue to do that. And of course, then that equality champion person's role and responsibility is to attend those, to continue to upskill themselves, but also trying to either re-deliver that themselves to their club members or to encourage their club members to engage in the program as well, and kind of ending then in the summer with a Club PAWB conference, which is a summit then for our equality champions and the wider football family to attend and sort of, have a day of upskilling their understanding and learning around EDI as well. So yeah, those are some of the things that we're working with clubs at the moment. And again, as we've done with everything, we'll be listening to some of those equality champions then over the next couple of years to try and find out what more support do they need, what are still some of the challenges. We know that resources, there'll be volunteers as well, but just providing as much support as we possibly can to them as well.
Yeah, there's a few things I want to pick out of that. One, education stuff, and I know you're super passionate about that, so I'll park that for now. We'll come back to that, but just the program kind of approach for the PAWB Club is it sounds really practical and really hands-on. And I think certainly from my experience working with clubs and delivering similar types of programs and activities in the work that I do in inclusive sport design with clubs, essentially clubs just want to be shown what to do. Generally speaking, most clubs will stick up their hand and say, yeah, we want to be more inclusive. We're just not sure what to do. Tell us how we go about it. We're ready. We want to do it, right? And a lot of times it's just knowing what to do is the barrier for clubs to actually achieve outcomes. So the fact that the program's there, they have access to resources, it's not compliance focused. It's actually about growth and development and helping the clubs achieve goals is really awesome. So well done on pulling that together. We might check in later and see how it's landing with all your clubs. The other thing I wanted to figure out was you mentioned about sort of how people are communicating and engaging with the community, through social media and sort of promoting the club and what they've got on offer. And typically they're, selling to themselves basically. And it just made me remember, I've done a couple of workshops where this has sort of been a part of the conversation around, how are you promoting your club to new audiences and new people? And a lot of them are saying, oh yeah, we put stuff up on our Facebook group and our Facebook page for the club. And that's how we promote and sort of try and connect with the community. I'm like, well, who's on your page? Who's following your pages? And they stop and they don't really know, but mostly it's their existing members. So it's like just this echo chamber of talking to the same people, and they wonder why they're not engaging with new audiences. And it's just such an important lesson in getting out. And it goes back to your point about your national strategy, connecting with all these sort of network and organizations in your target audience areas. Clubs have got to do that too. They've got to get out in their communities and get into spaces where these people are. And they're not on your Facebook page, generally speaking. They're out in the community doing other things. And I think that's such an important thing for clubs to think about. I know it's hard. Clubs, volunteer run mostly, and not a lot of time, but you get probably more bang for buck heading down to your local community centres and churches and stuff like that than sending out emails and putting ads in the paper. So, there's so many similarities to what I've experienced here and certainly in Australian clubland. So let's circle back to education, because I know this is an area that you're really passionate about and put a lot of focus and energy into. Hearing about the summit coming up and the training programs that you're doing, it's obvious. So how important is education? And this is a double barrel question. And what does good inclusion, diversity, education look like for sport?
Yeah, so as I've already said, education for me is so important, and I think even myself, somebody who's white, male, cisgender, non-disabled, almost a definition of privilege, really. I can't possibly, even with all my experience, really understand lived experiences of different community groups. And I think I've hugely dedicated so much time over the last sort of 15 years, really, to try and upskill myself and really learning and increasing my understanding and knowledge. And I think that's so important for anyone, whether or not they're an equality champion or involved in football as well, particularly if, they are of them the majority group. It's trying to understand different areas of equality, diversity and inclusion so that, whether you're in that equality champion lead role or a coach or anyone, that you can really understand as much as possible. As I mentioned earlier, different people's needs, support that you might need to tweak, coaching sessions, for example, or provide extra support for clubs as well. And, a great example of that is that you look at people who are colorblind, for example. You're a coach and you're using particular colored cones or bibs or balls, straight away your session's not inclusive at all. So somebody, if you're not colorblind yourself, that it looks fine. There's no difficulties, challenges. And I think is a great example of understanding that as well. Or, you have a child who's got ADHD or is autistic or ASD and not understanding that and maybe brushing individuals off as being disruptive or naughty children. And actually there's things that you can put in place and adapt sessions to ensure that they are included and have a really enjoyable time as well. So I think it's really important for us to provide multitude of different provisions across all the areas of EDI to try and get people to extend their understanding and knowledge in whatever role that they have as well. And would always be a a tip for me for individuals to spend that time and dedicate that time to learning really around this area.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that blokes like us who work in the diversity, equity, inclusion space to acknowledge the privileged position and the backgrounds that we have, and the fact that for us to be effective, for us to be authentic and to do a good job, we need to be listening to and making space for and amplifying the voices of people with lived experience. So that, I mean, we don't have that experience. We don't know that. We don't have that knowledge, right? So we've got to make space for that and help people that we're leading understand the importance and necessity of that too. Because too often, the white male, Anglo-Christian dominant societal kind of person ends up in these kinds of roles and potentially missing opportunities because you're not creating the space for the lived experience and bringing that into the work enough. And especially when at the moment, certainly in Australia, and I'm sure over in Wales too, there's an uplift of investment and prioritization of this work. But a lot of organizations are sharing responsibility with pre-existing roles. So a lot of D&I roles aren't dedicated full-time for people to take on. So unless they are, it's really difficult to bring the lived experience into the professional positions, I feel. So I'm not sure if that's something that's going on over in Wales as well. So it's incumbent on, I think, those people who have D&I in their kind of responsibilities, but maybe not fully, that they're leveraging lived experience and bringing that into their work and not, just trying to do the work on their own.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I'm always believe that you need someone fully designated for this if you want to make a real sustainable change and difference. However, it's also important to acknowledge and to state that it's the EDI at the, Football Association of Wales and Welsh Football is not solely my responsibility. It's not just me. And I think it's important that, and something that we've, continually working hard on, is actually ingraining it and culturally embedding it throughout our whole organizations, because it's actually everyone's responsibility. So, with our overarching, our Wales for Welsh Football, for the association, EDI is embedded throughout all elements, whether it be international, on the international stage, whether it be grassroots, whether it be refereeing and finance, in everything. So that's really important, that it's everyone's responsibility, and we need everyone really to play a key part and a key role in developing EDI. Otherwise it won't be successful.
That's such an important point. And that takes time though, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not something that happens overnight. And, so in my experience, I spent 12 years at Swimming Australia, National Swimming Federation here. And, from the time I started there to the time that I left, we saw some of that change, and it was happening before I came in. There was plenty of amazing people doing that work before I got involved, so we're talking the work and efforts of people over, 30 years or more maybe, to get to a point where the media team just includes the para guys in the marketing material without being prompted or reminded as part of strategy, right? Whereas 10 or 15 years earlier, it wasn't even on the radar, So this stuff takes time, but you've got to have that drive and dedication from a dedicated position, I feel. And it's roles like yours that make the difference. So that's all super valuable stuff. So we're coming up to our time, and I've got some hopefully fun and interesting quickfire questions for you. Are you ready for these?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. So quickfire question number 1. Which athlete inspires you the most right now?
Well, it's a good question. I think, from some of the last couple of years, seeing the real change in some athletes, but, almost becoming, real social advocates for many aspects. You're talking Marcus Rashford with some of the work that he's done with preschool meals, and Raheem Sterling around some of his challenges around the Black Lives Matter movement, etc. Hugely inspiring on that front. And then on another front, our national women's team that, just missed out on qualifying for the Women's World Cup recently, it's seeing them an hour after the game, after, going into extra time and spending time signing autographs and taking photos with young girls and boys, who are going to be the next generation of, players, fans, staff at the FAW was really inspiring for me, that are really leading the way, I think, on many aspects as well. Hugely inspiring for me, definitely.
Yeah, nice. That might answer your next question. Who's your favourite sports team?
Well, I support Cardiff City, which play in the second tier of obviously in England. So they're my season ticket holder. So they're my team that I support. But I mean, yeah, looking at other sports, you look at, teams like the All Blacks that have been hugely successful and the culture around that, I think it's certainly inspiring from that extent. But yeah, Cardiff City fan myself.
Nice. How are they going?
Yeah, okay, not too bad. We've had a lot of change this season. We've signed 17 new players. The real reshuffle of the team. Our manager's just left, unfortunately. But yeah, we're moving in the right direction with a different playing style. So yeah, exciting times moving forward.
Yeah, good, nice. Let's talk about you. What's your greatest sporting achievement? Could be on the field, could be off the field.
Yeah, I mean, we had a really good, going back a number of years now, but I coached a team called Merthyr Town Football Club, who play in quite the lower tiers now of the English system, but coached the under-18s, and there's a youth version of the FA Cup. And we managed to progress all the way from the real preliminary starting rounds right the way to the third round of the FA Cup. And coincidentally, played Cardiff City actually at Ninian Park at a time, and lost to them. But yeah, probably from a coaching and sporting achievement, that was a real journey, definitely.
What's the first thing you do when you get up in the morning?
Coffee, definitely coffee.
I've switched to tea a little while ago, and I was doing 3 coffees a day, and now I'm maybe 1 or 2 or 3 coffees a week, and I'm switched to tea. I don't know what motivated me to do it. I don't know, coffee. I was probably having too much. All right, on to serious stuff here. What's your best inclusion tip for our listeners? So hopefully you've all stuck around for this one. What's your best tip? I'm sure you've got plenty.
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned a lot about education. So for me, It's just being committed to educating, to continue to progress your understanding and knowledge around EDI, but also trying to, understand, what is the current issues in society, and trying to be more aware of some of those. But then at all times, the biggest tip I think is make sure you're doing something day in, day out to really make a difference to people's lives, from a practical perspective. And I think all too often we see sort of performative allies, people who are easy to share something or tweet about something. But actually when the cameras are off, when people are not watching you, what are you doing to really be an ally to whatever community group it might be? I think that's the key point.
Yeah, inclusion's a habit. It's an everyday thing. It's not a one-off on the special one day of the year event, right? It's an ongoing effort.
Yeah.
Sage wisdom. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, Jason. Tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you, follow the work you're doing at Welsh Football. Where can they go to find out more?
Yeah, so we've got a microsite for our PAWB EDI work. So that's at www.pawb.cymru. So that's PAWB.cymru, CYMRU. Or you can check it out on the FW website at faw.cymru for all our wider work within Welsh Football as well.
Awesome. And listeners, make sure you head over to inclusivesportdesign.com as well for heaps of resources to help you take action on inclusion, take advantage of all the learnings you've got from this chat, steal the resources from Jason's work at Welsh Football, steal the stuff from inclusivesportdesign.com. And you can also join the Inclusive Sport Design community for free. Big group of global people all committed to inclusion, connecting there, and subscribe to the mailing list for free tips every week for free. All the links from what we've spoken about today will be in the transcripts and the show notes. And make sure you hit subscribe if you're on a podcast or if you're watching on YouTube. Thanks very much, Jason Weber. Thanks for making inclusion happen. Appreciate you for being here.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for the invite.